In March 1944, German engineers stood on the bank of a river in Poland, watching their newest creation attempt to cross. The Panzerkampfwagen 8 Maus. Maus. The ironic name for the heaviest tank ever built. 188 tons, 188. For comparison, the famous Tiger tank weighed 56 tons. The Maus weighed more than 3 Tigers combined. The engineers had built a bridge, a reinforced steel bridge designed to hold 100 tons. The Maus drove onto it. The bridge groaned, buckled, and collapsed into the river. The Maus, this $2 million engineering marvel, this supposed superweapon that would change the war, sank into 12 feet of water and stuck there, immobile, useless, exactly like Germany's entire superweapon program. Ambitious, impressive, and completely divorced from reality. This is the story of the Maus, how Germany, in the middle of losing World War II, decided what they really needed was a tank so heavy it couldn't cross bridges, so slow it couldn't keep up with infantry, so mechanically complex it broke down constantly, and so expensive that building 2 of them cost as much as building 200 normal tanks. This is the story of engineering excellence becoming strategic insanity, of how the Nazi obsession with bigger, heavier, more powerful weapons distracted from the reality that they were being crushed by enemies who built adequate weapons in overwhelming numbers. This is the story of the ultimate superweapon, a machine so powerful it was useless. To understand how Germany built the Maus, we need to understand Hitler's psychology, because the Maus was fundamentally Hitler's tank, his vision, his obsession. By 1942, the war was turning against Germany. The invasion of the Soviet Union had stalled. America had entered the war. Germany was being outproduced in tanks, aircraft, ships, everything. A rational response would be to simplify production. Focus on building adequate weapons in large numbers. That's what the Soviets did with the T-34. That's what America did with the Sherman. But Hitler wasn't rational. He was a dreamer, a fantasist. He believed in wonder weapons, Wunderwaffen. The idea that Germany could develop super weapons so advanced, so powerful, that they'd compensate for numerical inferiority. That a few perfect weapons could defeat many adequate weapons. It was magical thinking, but it drove German weapons development from 1942 until the end of the war. Hitler wanted bigger tanks, always bigger. When the Panther was being designed, he wanted it heavier. When the Tiger was built, he wanted something heavier than that. And when Ferdinand Porsche, yes, that Porsche, the sports car designer, proposed building the heaviest tank ever conceived, Hitler loved it, ordered it built immediately. Didn't care about the engineering problems, didn't care about the tactical limitations. He wanted a land battleship, and that's what Porsche tried to give him. The Maus was designed in 1942. Ferdinand Porsche's team at Krupp began work on a tank that would be invincible. The requirements were insane. Armor thick enough that no Allied weapon could penetrate it. A gun powerful enough to destroy any enemy tank at extreme range. Weight was irrelevant. Mobility was secondary. The only thing that mattered was absolute invulnerability and overwhelming firepower. The final design was monstrous. 188 tons. Frontal armor was 9.4 inches thick. 9.4 inches. That's nearly 10 inches of hardened steel. For context, the Tiger's frontal armor was 4 inches. The Maus had more than double the armor thickness. It was literally unpenetrable by any Allied tank gun. Not difficult to penetrate, impossible. Even the British 17-pounder gun, one of the best anti-tank guns of the war, couldn't penetrate Maus frontal armor at any range. The Maus's main gun was a 128mm cannon. 128mm. The Tiger used an 88mm gun, and that was already devastating. The Mauser's gun was 50% larger. It could destroy any Allied tank at ranges beyond 3,000 yards. Over a mile and a half, it could fire a shell that weighed 62 pounds. 62 pounds, a single shell. The Maus also had a secondary 75mm gun mounted coaxially. 2 guns, because why not? The tank's dimensions were absurd. 33 feet long, 12 feet wide, 12 feet tall. It was the size of a small house. The turret alone weighed 50 tons. 50 tons, just the turret. That's almost as much as an entire Tiger tank. The Maus required a crew of 6, driver, radio operator, commander, gunner, loader for the main gun, loader for the secondary gun, 6 men to operate this mobile fortress. The engine was a Daimler-Benz diesel, MB509, 1,200 horsepower. That sounds powerful. It was powerful. But 188 tons needs a lot more than 1,200 horsepower. The Maus had a top speed of 8 miles per hour on roads. 8. You could walk faster. On rough terrain, it managed maybe 3 miles per hour. It was slower than infantry, slower than horse-drawn wagons. This superweapon couldn't keep up with soldiers walking. Now, here's where the engineering problems became comically bad. 188 tons is too heavy for bridges. All bridges. Germany had excellent engineers. They knew this, so they designed the Maus to ford rivers, to drive underwater. The tank was sealed, had a snorkel system for the engine, could theoretically drive across river bottoms at depths up to 25 feet. Theoretically. In practice, it rarely worked. The Maus would sink into soft river bottoms, get stuck, the seals would leak, the engine would flood, and even when it worked, the tank could only cross rivers where the banks were gentle enough to drive down and climb back up. Most rivers had steep banks. The Maus couldn't climb them. Too heavy, not enough power. So the underwater crossing ability was mostly useless. Germany built 2 complete Maus tanks. 2, plus several incomplete prototypes. The first prototype was finished in late 1943. It was tested at Kummersdorf Proving Ground near Berlin. The testing revealed every problem you'd expect. The tank was too slow, too unreliable, too heavy. It destroyed roads when it drove on them. The asphalt couldn't handle 188 tons. The tank would leave deep ruts, sometimes break through the road surface entirely. It couldn't cross bridges. Testing engineers tried multiple bridges. The Maus destroyed all of them. It broke down constantly. The transmission couldn't handle the weight. The engine overheated. The tracks broke. Parts wore out in hours instead of hundreds of hours. Maintenance was a nightmare. You needed specialized equipment just to service the tank. A crane to lift the turret, hoists for the engine, custom tools. And finding replacement parts was nearly impossible because only 2 tanks existed. If a part broke, you either had to manufacture a new one from scratch or cannibalize the other tank. Let me tell you about fuel consumption. The Maus got approximately 0.3 miles per gallon. 0.3. That means it needed over 3 gallons of fuel to travel 1 mile. Its fuel tanks held 3,700 litres. About 980 gallons. That gave it a theoretical range of 300 miles. But theoretical range and actual range are very different. In reality, the Maus probably had an operational range of maybe 100 miles before needing refueling. And refueling required fuel trucks. Multiple fuel trucks. A Maus in the field would need a dedicated logistics train just to keep it supplied with fuel. Now, let's talk cost. Each Maus cost approximately 2 million Reichsmarks. 2 million. For context, a Panther tank cost 117,000 Reichsmarks. A Tiger cost 250,000. The Maus cost 8 times as much as a Tiger. For the price of 2 Maus tanks, Germany could have built 32 Panthers, or 16 Tigers. Think about that trade-off. 2 immobile, unreliable, super-heavy tanks, or 32 perfectly capable medium tanks, which would be more useful in actual combat. But Hitler loved the Maus. He visited the Kummersdorf testing facility in May 1943 to see it. He was impressed, excited, ordered increased production, wanted dozens of them, hundreds eventually. He envisioned Maus battalions smashing through enemy lines, invincible fortresses on tracks. His generals tried to talk him out of it. Guderian, the tank expert, argued that the Maus was impractical, that Germany needed more Panthers, not fewer super-heavy tanks. Hitler ignored him. Production plans were drawn up, facilities allocated, but reality intervened. By late 1943, Germany was being bombed relentlessly. Factories were being destroyed. Resources were scarce. Steel, rubber, fuel, all in short supply. Building a 188-ton tank required enormous amounts of all those materials that could have been used for other weapons. So production was slow, agonizingly slow. The second complete Maus wasn't finished until mid-1944. And by then, the war situation had changed dramatically. The Soviets were advancing. The Western Allies had invaded Italy. D-Day was imminent. Germany was on the defensive, fighting a losing war on multiple fronts, and the Maus, this superweapon, was still sitting at the testing ground, too slow to reach the front, too unreliable to risk in combat, too valuable to lose. So it sat, doing nothing, while Germany desperately needed tanks at the front. Let me tell you what German soldiers thought about the Maus. Very few ever saw it. It was a secret project. But rumours spread. Soldiers talked about a super-heavy tank, a giant. Some thought it was propaganda. Some hoped it was real. Most who learned the details were sceptical. A tank that couldn't cross bridges, that moved at walking speed, that required a fuel convoy to operate. What good was that? How would it reach the battle? How would it maneuver? How would it retreat if things went wrong? The questions were endless and the answers were depressing. Some German engineers loved the Maus. It was an engineering achievement, a testament to German technical skill. The armour was perfectly manufactured. The gun was precise. The systems were complex but elegant. As an engineering project, it was impressive. But as a weapon, it was absurd. And that's the fundamental problem with the Maus. It was designed by engineers who prioritized technical perfection over military practicality, who built the best tank possible without considering whether the best tank possible was actually useful. Now let's compare the Maus to what Germany actually needed in 1944. Germany needed tanks that could be produced quickly, that were reliable, that could be transported by rail to the front, that could maneuver in combat, that could be maintained by field mechanics. The Panther was good. The Panzer IV was adequate. Germany needed thousands of those. Instead, they invested resources in building 2 Maus tanks that never fought in combat. Here's a thought experiment. If Germany had taken the resources used on the Maus program, the steel, the labour, the engineering hours, and invested them in producing Panthers, how many could they have built? Rough estimate, maybe 50 Panthers. 50 functional, combat-capable medium tanks instead of 2 unusable super-heavy tanks. Which would have been more valuable? The answer is obvious, but Hitler didn't want 50 Panthers. He wanted superweapons. He wanted to believe that German technical superiority could compensate for being outnumbered. That quality could defeat quantity. The Maus was the ultimate expression of that delusion. Let me tell you about what happened when Soviet forces approached the testing ground in April 1945. The two Mao's tanks were still there, Germany was collapsing, Berlin was being encircled, and the Mao's tanks were sitting at Kummersdorf, 40 miles south of Berlin, waiting for orders that would never come. German engineers received instructions to destroy the tanks to prevent them from being captured. They tried. They placed explosives on the tanks, detonated them. The explosives damaged both tanks but didn't completely destroy them. The armor was too thick. The explosives couldn't penetrate it. So the hulks of the Mao's tanks were left behind when German forces retreated. Soviet forces captured them, studied them, were simultaneously impressed and baffled, impressed by the engineering, baffled by the impracticality. The Soviets salvaged parts from both tanks, combined them into one semi-functional Maus, transported it to the Kubinka Tank Museum near Moscow. It's still there today, the only complete Maus tank in existence. You can visit it, walk around it, marvel at its absurd size, and understand why it never fought in combat. Because it's not a weapon, it's a monument to engineering hubris, to the gap between ambition and reality, to what happens when you prioritize perfection over practicality. Now, let's talk about the broader context. The Maus wasn't the only German superweapon project. There were dozens. The V-2 rocket, the jet-powered Me-262 fighter, the Type 21 submarine, the E-series tanks, all ambitious, all technically advanced, all expensive, and all too late or too impractical to change the war's outcome. Germany invested enormous resources in super weapon programs, while their enemies invested in mass production of adequate weapons. The V-2 rocket program is a perfect parallel to the Maus. Germany built over 3,000 V-2 rockets, launched them at London and other cities. Each rocket cost as much as a fighter aircraft. The entire program consumed resources equivalent to building 24,000 fighter aircraft. Did the V-2s change the war? No. They killed civilians, caused terror, but strategically they were meaningless. Germany would have been better off building 24,000 fighters to defend against Allied bombers. But Hitler wanted superweapons, so Germany built rockets instead of fighters, just like they built the Maus instead of Panthers. This is a pattern. Nazi Germany, particularly in the last 2 years of the war, became obsessed with technological solutions to strategic problems. They believed that wonder weapons would somehow reverse Germany's losing position, that a few advanced weapons would defeat the overwhelming numerical superiority of the Allies. It was fantasy, desperation disguised as innovation. The Maus represented this mindset perfectly. Germany didn't need a 188-ton tank. They needed 500 more medium tanks, but 500 medium tanks wasn't exciting, wasn't revolutionary, wasn't a wonder weapon. So they built the Maus, and it accomplished nothing except wasting resources and demonstrating that technical achievement doesn't equal military effectiveness. Let me tell you about the people who worked on the Maus. Engineers at Krupp, Porsche, Alket. These were skilled people, talented. They worked long hours designing and building this machine. They solved complex problems. The armor manufacturing alone was a significant achievement. Creating 9-inch thick armor plates that were uniform and hardened correctly required advanced metallurgy. The gun was precision engineered. The transmission, despite being inadequate for the weight, was sophisticated. These engineers could have been working on something useful, improving Panther production, designing better logistics vehicles, creating better anti-tank guns. Instead, they spent 2 years building a tank that never fired a shot in anger. That's the tragedy. Not that the Maus was a bad tank. It was an excellent tank if your criteria are armor and firepower. But it was useless because warfare isn't just about armor and firepower. It's about mobility, reliability, production capacity, strategic deployment. The Maus failed at all of those. Now, here's an interesting question. Could the Maus have been useful in any scenario? Let's imagine. Suppose Germany had built 10 Maus tanks instead of 2. Suppose they'd positioned them as fixed fortifications, as bunkers, not mobile weapons but stationary gun emplacements, with proper support, infantry, anti-aircraft, supply lines. Could they have been effective? Maybe. A stationary Maus would be very difficult to destroy. Its armor was impenetrable frontally. Its gun could destroy any Allied tank at extreme range. If positioned defensively, protecting a key location, it might have been valuable. But Germany didn't need fixed fortifications in 1944. They needed mobile defenses. They needed to be able to respond to Allied breakthroughs. A stationary Maus is just a very expensive pillbox, and Germany could build actual pillboxes much cheaper. So even in the best-case scenario, the Maus was marginal. It was a solution looking for a problem, an answer to a question nobody asked. Germany asked, how do we stop the Allies? The Maus answered, build an invincible tank. But that wasn't the solution Germany needed. They needed to build more tanks, period. The Maus was the wrong answer to the right question. Let's talk about the psychological appeal of superweapons. Why did Hitler love them? Why did German leadership invest in them? Part of it was desperation. When you're losing, you look for miracle solutions, something that will change the game. Reverse your fortunes. Superweapons promise that. They promise that one breakthrough will change everything. It's appealing because it avoids confronting the real problem, that you're being outproduced, outmanned, outfought. Superweapons let you believe that you're still superior, that you haven't lost your edge, that you just need that one perfect weapon and everything will change. It's a comforting lie, and Hitler believed it until the end. He talked about wonder weapons reversing Germany's fortunes even in April 1945, when Berlin was surrounded. He believed that jet fighters or new tanks or rockets would somehow save Germany. They didn't. They couldn't. Because Germany's problem wasn't weapons technology. It was that they were fighting the entire world and losing. The Maus is a perfect symbol of that delusion. A tank so heavy it couldn't move. So advanced it was impractical. So expensive it was wasteful. Built at a time when Germany needed simple solutions, not complex ones. It represents everything wrong with late-war German strategy. Technological sophistication masking strategic bankruptcy. Now, let me tell you about some other nations' reactions to heavy tanks. Because Germany wasn't alone in exploring the concept. The British built heavy tanks. The Churchill infantry tank weighed 40 tons. Heavy for its time, but mobile enough to be useful. The Soviets built the KV series. The KV-2 weighed 52 tons, but it was mobile, reliable, produced in thousands. America experimented with super heavy tanks. The T-28 assault tank weighed 95 tons, but they recognized it was impractical and never put it in mass production. Every nation that experimented with super heavy tanks concluded they weren't worth it. Too slow, too expensive, too maintenance intensive. Better to build more medium tanks. Germany reached the same conclusion eventually, but only after wasting resources on projects like the Maus. That's the difference between Germany and its enemies. The Allies learned from mistakes and adapted. Germany doubled down on failed concepts and hoped for miracles. Let me tell you what modern tank designers think about the Maus. I've read interviews with current military engineers analyzing World War II tanks. The consensus on the Maus is that it's an engineering marvel, and a tactical disaster. The armor achievement is respected. 9 inches of hardened steel is impressive even by modern standards. The gun was powerful, the systems were sophisticated, but the fundamental concept was flawed. A tank needs to be mobile, needs to be sustainable. The Maus failed both requirements. Modern main battle tanks, like the M1 Abrams or Leopard 2, weigh around 60 to 70 tons. That's considered the upper limit for practical tanks. Anything heavier sacrifices too much mobility. Can't cross bridges. Can't be transported easily. The Maus at 188 tons was 3 times too heavy. It violated every principle of practical armoured vehicle design. Modern engineers look at it and see a cautionary tale, a reminder that technical capability must be matched with operational practicality. Now let's talk about the end of the Maus story, April 1945. The war is ending. Soviet forces are overrunning Germany. The 2 Maus tanks at Kummersdorf are destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. But the destruction is incomplete. The Soviets recover parts, build 1 complete tank from the 2 wrecks. That tank is transported to Moscow, displayed as a trophy. Evidence of German engineering skill and strategic foolishness. For decades, the Maus sat in storage at Kubinka. The Cold War. The Soviet Union didn't display it publicly much. It was a curiosity. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Kubinka Tank Museum became more accessible. The Maus was restored cosmetically, put on public display. Now it's one of the museum's main attractions. Thousands of people visit every year. They photograph it, marvel at its size, read about its history, and understand why it never fought. The Maus has become famous in internet tank culture. Military history enthusiasts love it. It represents the extreme, the ultimate heavy tank. People debate whether it could have been useful, whether Germany should have built more, whether it would have changed anything. The answer is always no. But the debates continue because the Maus is fascinating. It's a what if, a might have been, a glimpse at an alternate timeline where engineering excellence mattered more than strategic reality. But in our timeline, the timeline that actually happened, the Maus was irrelevant. It never fired at an enemy, never defended Germany, never justified its cost. It sat at a testing ground while the war passed it by. And then it was destroyed, captured, studied, and forgotten except as a curiosity, a footnote, a symbol of German desperation and delusion in the final years of the war. Let me bring this back to the bigger picture. The Maus wasn't built in isolation. It was part of a culture that valued technical perfection over practical effectiveness, that believed German engineering superiority could compensate for numerical inferiority, that invested in 100 ambitious projects instead of focusing on a few practical ones. That culture, that mindset, helps explain why Germany lost the war. Germany had excellent engineers, skilled workers, advanced technology, but they were fighting the wrong war. They were building super weapons when they needed standard weapons. They were pursuing perfection when they needed adequacy at scale. The Soviets built 84,000 T-34s during the war. 84,000. America built 50,000 Shermans. Germany built 6,000 Panthers and 1,300 Tigers, and 2 Maus tanks. The numbers tell the story. Quality doesn't matter when you're outnumbered 10-1. The Maus is the perfect embodiment of that failure. It was the best heavy tank ever built. Invulnerable armor, devastating firepower, engineering excellence, and completely useless. Because it couldn't get to the battlefield, couldn't cross bridges, couldn't keep up with the war. It was an engineering triumph and a strategic disaster. The ultimate symbol of Germany's late war obsession with wonder weapons that never materialized. So what's the lesson? What do we learn from the Maus? That technical superiority isn't enough. That weapons must be practical, not just powerful. That production capacity matters more than individual unit capability. That mobility and reliability are more important than armor and firepower. That building 2 perfect tanks is worse than building 50 good tanks. That desperation leads to bad decisions. That miracle solutions don't exist. That wars are won by logistics, production, and strategy, not by wonder weapons. Germany built the Maus because they couldn't accept reality. They couldn't accept that they were losing, that their enemies had more resources, more factories, more men, more everything. So they pursued fantasies, super weapons, wonder weapons, weapons so advanced they'd change everything. The Maus was one of those fantasies, a 188-ton dream that crushed every bridge it crossed and contributed nothing to Germany's war effort except wasting resources they couldn't afford to waste. That's the story of the Maus, the heaviest tank ever built, the most heavily armored, the most impractical, a monument to engineering ambition and strategic bankruptcy, a machine so powerful it was useless, so advanced it arrived too late, so heavy the earth itself couldn't support it. Germany built the Maus and it crushed every bridge it crossed. Just like Germany's super weapon program crushed Germany's chances of winning the war, the Maus didn't save Germany. Nothing could, but it did give us a perfect symbol, a metaphor, a cautionary tale about what happens when you pursue perfection while your enemies pursue practicality, about what happens when you build dreams instead of weapons, about what happens when engineering excellence becomes divorced from military reality. The Maus sits in a museum today, 188 tons of steel and ambition. Visitors walk around it, take pictures, marvel at its size, and understand why it failed. Not because it wasn't good enough, but because it was too good, too perfect, too ambitious, too heavy, too everything except useful. That's the legacy of the Maus, the tank that was so powerful it was powerless, so advanced it was obsolete before completion, so heavy it couldn't move. The ultimate German superweapon, a failure so spectacular it became legendary.